The room is small and quiet, the way hospital rooms always are. Not peaceful, just controlled. There is a single window with thin blinds, 2 chairs on one side of the table and one on the other. I walk in carrying a manila folder, wearing my white coat, and I set the folder down without rushing. I never rush. My parents are sitting across from me. My mother is in her good blouse, the navy one she wears to church meetings. My father has his hands folded in his lap the way he does when he doesn't know what to say, which has always been most of the time. They don't recognize me right away. That happens sometimes when people see a doctor first and a person second. I pull out the chair, sit down, and open the folder. "Good morning," I say. "I'm Dr. Carter. I'll be handling your case today." My mother's head comes up slowly. Her eyes move from my coat to my face, and I watch the moment it lands. That specific stuttering recognition. "Naomi?" she says, almost a whisper. I look at her evenly. "Dr. Carter?" She opens her mouth, closes it. My father goes very still beside her. I hold their gaze for exactly a beat, longer than is comfortable, then look back down at the file. There is a lot in that file. I have read every word of it. Twice. Names and identifying details in this story have been changed to protect privacy. My mother told me I was too slow to be a doctor. She said it gently, the way she said most brutal things. Softly, with her hand on my arm and a sad tilt of her head, as if she were delivering news I should have already figured out myself. I was 16 years old, sitting at our kitchen table in Decatur, Georgia, with a biology textbook open in front of me and a dream I hadn't yet learned to hide. She said she was just being realistic. 17 years later, I am the one holding her file, and I am about to be very realistic with her. But let me take you back. Because the woman sitting in that consultation chair didn't become Dr. Carter overnight. She became Dr. Carter the long way. The slow way, if you want to use my mother's word for it. And I've decided I don't mind that word anymore. I grew up in Decatur, just outside Atlanta, the kind of neighborhood where everybody went to the same church, where your business was also your neighbor's business, and where your mother's reputation at the deacon's board meant more to her than almost anything else. We lived in a brick ranch house off Candler Road. My mother kept it spotless. She kept everything spotless. The house, her image, her version of our family. My name is Naomi Carter. I am 36 years old. I am an internal medicine physician in Atlanta, and I grew up being told, quietly and consistently, that my mind worked wrong. Not in those words. My mother was far too careful for those words, but the message was always the same. I was too slow. I took too long to answer questions in class. I reread paragraphs that my brother Marcus absorbed in a single pass. I needed to sit with information before it settled into me, turning it over, testing it from different angles, the way you'd examine a stone before deciding whether it was worth keeping. My teachers called it a processing delay. My mother called it something closer to a ceiling. I processed the world carefully, and my mother had decided, early on, that careful was a polite word for limited. Marcus was 2 years older, quick, charming, the kind of student who raised his hand before the teacher finished the question. My mother lit up around him. She still does. He was pre-med from the age of 14, and our house reflected that ambition in every small way. The anatomy posters in his room, the tutors who came on Saturday mornings, the way my mother introduced him at church. This is Marcus. He's going to be a doctor. With a pride in her voice that sounded like a fist. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because it's the architecture of what came next. I was 16 when I told my mother I wanted to apply to a pre-med track. I had thought about how to say it for weeks. I had a plan. I sat down at the kitchen table one evening after dinner, while the news played low in the other room, and the smell of her cornbread still hung in the air, and I told her. She didn't yell. She never yelled. She just looked at me with that particular expression, the one that mixed warmth and pity into something that felt like both and neither. And she began to explain, very calmly, why that wasn't going to work. I want you to stay right here for that conversation, because what she said to me in the next few minutes was the sentence that everything else in this story grew from. She folded her hands on the table. That was the first thing I noticed. She folded her hands the way she did before she said something she had already decided, the way a judge settles in before a ruling. "Baby," she said, "I want to talk to you about something real." I kept my face neutral. Even then, I had learned to keep my face neutral around her. "You know I love you. You know that." A pause. She waited for me to nod, so I nodded. "But I need you to think practically about your future. I need you to be realistic." Realistic. That was the word she loaded and cocked before she fired the rest of it. "Medical school is hard, Naomi, and it is fast. The studying, the MCAT, the residency, all of it moves fast. And the people who make it are the people who can keep up with that pace." She tilted her head. Her voice stayed soft. "Nursing would be wonderful for you. Or medical administration. You could still be part of that world, just in a role that suits the way you work." I said, "I think I could do it." She smiled, the sad smile, the one that meant she had already closed the door and was just waiting for me to notice. "Sweetheart," she reached over and touched my hand. "Medical school is for people who can keep up. That's just not you." She said it like a fact, the way you'd say the sky is blue, or Marta runs late on Sundays. A thing so obvious it barely needed saying out loud, and wasn't it kind of her, really, to say it before I embarrassed myself further? My father was in the living room the entire time. I could hear the television. He never came to the doorway, not once. I sat at that table for what felt like a long time after she got up to finish the dishes. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my biology book and turned the word realistic over in my mind, the way I turned everything over. Slowly, from every angle, trying to find where the truth in it was. I couldn't find it. But I was 16, and she was my mother, and so I filed it somewhere deep, and didn't speak of pre-med again for the rest of that year. Marcus, meanwhile, was preparing for his SATs with a tutor named Mr. Givens, who came to the house every Saturday morning and drank my mother's coffee, and told her Marcus had a natural aptitude. She would beam. She would tell my father later, loud enough for me to hear from my room, that Marcus had the gift. That some people were built for certain paths, and you just knew. 3 weeks after the kitchen conversation, I was helping my mother carry groceries in from the car when I heard her on the phone with my Aunt Deb. I wasn't meant to hear it, and I've thought about that for years. Whether she knew I was in the hallway, or whether she simply didn't consider it mattered. She said, "Marcus has the brain for medicine. You know how it is. It skips sometimes. Naomi is more of a support person. She'll find her lane." I set the grocery bags down on the counter very carefully. I did not slam anything. I did not say anything. I walked to my room, closed the door, and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling for a long time, that sentence moving through me like a slow bleed. Support person. I want you to hold that word, 'cause I held it for years. And the interesting thing about being told you are a support person, someone designed to stand behind the main event, is that it either breaks you or it makes you extraordinarily precise about proving the alternative. I was 17 that spring when I found the registration form for a community college biology course. Atlanta Metropolitan State College, evening section, 12 weeks. I filled the form out myself, paid the registration fee from my part-time job at a sandwich shop near Decatur Square, and told no one. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Marcus. I was not ready to have the conversation again. I was not ready to watch her fold her hands. So I went alone. The class was held in a low building on a Tuesday and Thursday evening, and it smelled like dry erase markers and old carpet. The instructor was a retired biology teacher named Mr. Osei, who wrote everything on the board in block letters and never talked down to anyone. I sat in the second row and I took notes so detailed they practically bled off the page. I read every chapter twice. I sat with the hard concepts until they opened up, the way things always did when I gave them enough time. At the end of the 12 weeks, Mr. Osei handed back our finals. Mine had a number at the top written in red pen, circled twice. 97. I stared at it for a long moment. The classroom noise went quiet around me, not in a dramatic way, just the way things go quiet when something important happens and your body knows it before your mind catches up. I drove home on I-20 that night with the test paper folded in my bag, and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The kitchen light was on. I could see my mother moving behind the curtains. I did not tell her. I just sat there with that number, and for the first time in a long time I thought, she might be wrong about me. Not screaming it, not triumphant. Just a quiet, careful thought, turning itself over in the dark. Medical school is for people who can keep up. That's just not you. Those words sat in me for years. If this story is already hitting different, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Revenge Bite so you don't miss what happens when I walk into that waiting room. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I want to know who's here for this one. I did not tell anyone about that biology grade for a long time. I kept the test paper in a shoebox under my bed, folded between an old journal and a birthday card from my grandmother. Some nights I would pull it out and just look at it. Not to feel proud exactly, but to remind myself that the number was real. That I had earned it without help, without tutors, without anyone in my corner believing I could. I enrolled in the next course the following semester. Then the one after that. Chemistry, then microbiology, then anatomy. I took them one or two at a time, around my shifts at the sandwich shop, around the noise of a house that had already decided what I was. My mother never asked why I was out on Tuesday evenings. I think she assumed it was something small, a friend, a class for work. She did not ask because she was not watching for evidence of something she had already concluded wasn't there. I was not fast. I want to be honest about that. Other students in those evening classes would finish exams early and sit back with that particular kind of ease that meant the material had come quickly. I was never the first to put my pencil down. I read slowly, checked my reasoning, came back to questions I wasn't certain about before committing. My instructors sometimes noticed the deliberateness. Mr. O.C. noticed it first. He told me once after class that I asked better questions than anyone in the room. Not faster, better. I held on to that distinction. By the time I was 20, I had accumulated enough credits and enough of a science record that transferring to a 4-year university was not a dream anymore. It was just paperwork. I applied to Georgia State, I got in. I packed a single bag and moved into a shared apartment in East Atlanta with 2 roommates I found on a bulletin board, and I did not make a ceremony of leaving. My mother hugged me at the door, told me to call on Sundays, and mentioned, almost as an aside, that Marcus was looking at medical school interviews. I said that was great. I got into my car and I drove away. University was harder than community college in the way that real things are harder than practice. The courses were faster, the material was denser, And I was surrounded by students who had come straight from strong high schools with tutors and AP credits, and families who had been preparing them for this their whole lives. I was not that student. I was the one who stayed in the library on Friday nights, who reread chapters until they stopped feeling foreign, who sat in office hours not because I was struggling but because I needed to understand something fully before I could move on. It took me longer than the traditional path. I made peace with that. I did not rush, and I did not pretend the extra time was something to be ashamed of. I applied to medical schools in my mid-20s, later than most of my peers. I applied to several, and I was rejected by several. I want to tell you that part too, because this is not a story where everything bends easily once you decide to try. There were years of trying. There were nights in that East Atlanta apartment when I sat at my small desk with rejection emails on the screen and thought about my mother's folded hands and wondered, just for a moment, if she had been right. She hadn't been. I applied again. And on a Thursday morning in March, while I was standing in the break room at the hospital administration job I had taken to pay my bills, my phone lit up with an email from Emory University School of Medicine. I read it once. Then I sat down on a plastic chair next to the coffee machine and read it again. I had been accepted. I called no one from that break room. I sat with it quietly, the way I sat with everything that mattered, and let it settle into me until it felt real. It was Dr. Evelyn Shaw who met me at orientation. Not formally, not yet, but she was the one who stopped in the hallway when I was studying a posted diagram of cardiac anatomy, really studying it, not glancing at it, and she paused long enough to look at me instead of the diagram. "You're not just memorizing it," she said, not a question. "No," I said. "I'm trying to understand why it's built the way it is." She looked at me a beat longer than most people did. "What's your name?" "Naomi Carter." "Carter," she nodded slowly. "Don't let them rush you in there. The ones who take their time save more lives than the ones who are fast." She walked on. I stood in that hallway for a moment before I moved. Dr. Evelyn Shaw was 58 years old, a veteran internist with a reputation for being the kind of precise that made other physicians uncomfortable. She became my mentor before either of us formally named it that way. She was the first adult in my life who looked at how I worked and did not see a deficit. She saw a method. "You don't rush," she told me once, midway through my first year, after I had caught a detail in a case file that others had moved past. In medicine, that saves lives. I went home that evening and sat on my apartment steps for a while, just breathing Atlanta air, thinking about a 16-year-old girl at a kitchen table in Decatur and what she would have given to hear that sentence then. I told my parents I had been accepted to Emory on a Sunday call. My father said, "Oh, well, that's something." My mother was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Well, let's see how long that lasts." No congratulations, no celebration, not even the sad smile, because at least the sad smile acknowledged me. There was just that sentence, hanging in the air between us like a door closing. I said, "Okay, Mom," and I hung up. The white coat ceremony was held on a bright September morning on Emory's campus, the kind of Atlanta morning where the light is still clean before the heat settles in. There were families everywhere, cameras, mothers in church clothes, fathers in their good suits. I looked out into the audience from where I stood in line, and I found the empty space where my parents should have been. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked forward. Dr. Shaw placed the coat on my shoulders, and she leaned in quietly and said, "This is yours, Carter, every inch of it." I nodded. I did not cry. But I held the edge of those sleeves the entire ceremony and did not let go. Medical school does not break you the way people describe it in movies. Not all at once, not dramatically. It grinds. It is a slow, sustained pressure that finds every weak point you have and sits on it until either you reinforce it or you fold. I reinforced. There were nights in my first year when I sat in the Emory Library at 2 a.m. with a pharmacology textbook open and my eyes burning, and I genuinely could not remember why I had wanted this. Not in a theatrical way, just in the way exhaustion strips away everything until you are left with bare function. I would close the book, drink water, sleep 4 hours, and open the book again. Not because I was heroic, because I had come too far and paid too much and sat too long at that kitchen table to do anything else. What saved me in those moments repeatedly was precision. My instinct to go slowly, to check and recheck, to question before concluding, turned out to be exactly what medicine required. Where other students rushed through patient histories and landed on the obvious answer, I stayed a beat longer and sometimes found the thing underneath. An attending named Dr. Okafor pulled me aside after rounds once in my second year and told me I had the best chart notes in the cohort. "You write like a detective," he said, "like you're trying to rule things out, not just rule things in." I thought about Mr. Osei's biology class. I thought about the second row and the block letters on the board. I thought, I have been building this for a long time. The patients were what made it real. There was a woman in her 70s during my internal medicine rotation who reminded me of my grandmother. The way she held her hands, the way she looked at the ceiling when she was thinking. I sat with her longer than the rotation technically required. I asked her questions that went past the clinical checklist. When we found what was wrong with her and started her on treatment, she took my hand and said, "You really listened." I carried that out of the room like something fragile. Have you ever chased a dream in secret because you knew your family wouldn't believe in you? I want you to think about that while I keep going. And if that's your story too, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed to Revenge Bite yet, now is a very good time. Because what comes next? You are going to want to be here for it. I graduated from Emory School of Medicine on a warm May afternoon. Raymond sent a text that said, "Congratulations, Naomi, we are proud." 3 words that had taken 36 years and a medical degree to arrive. I read it once, put my phone back in my pocket, and walked across the stage. Patricia sent nothing. I matched into internal medicine at a hospital in Midtown Atlanta, exactly where I had aimed. Residency was 3 more years of the grind, of 30-hour calls and impossible decisions, and learning, always learning, how to hold a patient's fear without absorbing it. I was not the fastest resident. I was the most thorough. My supervising attendings wrote evaluations that used the same words, over and over. Meticulous, careful, precise. Words that had once been used against me. After residency, I built a practice, slowly, deliberately, the same way I did everything. I joined a group practice first. Spent 3 years building a patient base and a reputation, and then I made the decision to open my own clinic. The paperwork took months. The financing took longer. I signed the lease on a quiet Tuesday morning and stood alone in the empty space. Bare walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of fresh paint, and said nothing. Just stood there. The sign above the door read, "Carter Internal Medicine." I did not throw a party. I did not invite my parents. I took a photograph of the sign with my phone and sent it to Dr. Shaw, who wrote back 2 words. There it is. I had minimal contact with my parents through those years. Polite calls on holidays. Brief, careful conversations that stayed on the surface, because that was the only safe depth. My mother would update me on church activities, on the neighborhood, on Marcus, who had by then left his pre-med path and moved into car dealership management. She spoke about him with the same pride as always. She told people at church he had almost become a doctor, which was its own kind of creativity. I listened. I responded appropriately. I kept the distance. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, I was between patients, standing at my desk reviewing a file. My phone rang. My mother's name on the screen. She was warm, chatty even. She asked about the weather in Atlanta, mentioned something about the church renovations, asked whether I had been eating properly, and then, after a while, with the same casual tone she used for everything, "You know, Raymond and I have been having some health issues lately. Nothing urgent, we think, but we've been meaning to see someone. Do you happen to know any good doctors in the area?" I stood very still. I knew what a thorough practitioner looked like from the outside. I knew what this clinic's reputation had become in Atlanta medical circles. I knew, in that moment, exactly what I was about to do. Actually, I said, "I know a practice that would be perfect for you. Let me give you the number." I gave them the number to my own front desk. I hung up the phone and sat down in my chair and stayed very still for a long time. My next patient was in 20 minutes. I had a file to finish reviewing. I looked at the name on the front of the folder in my hands. I looked at the door. Something had just been set in motion that could not be undone. I had not planned it. Or maybe some part of me had been planning it for 20 years, slowly, carefully, the way I did everything, building towards something I never rushed, because I knew it would arrive exactly when it was supposed to. They arrived on a Wednesday morning. I know this because I had looked at the schedule the night before. Not obsessively, just once, the way I reviewed all my upcoming appointments. 2 new patients. Carter, Patricia, and Carter Raymond. I had stared at those names for a moment, then closed the schedule and gone to bed. I slept fine. My receptionist, Diane, is a woman in her mid-40s who has worked the front desk of Carter Internal Medicine for 4 years. She is warm and efficient and has a memory for faces that borders on uncanny. I had not told her anything about these particular patients beyond what was already in the system. I didn't need to. I was in my office reviewing labs when Diane's voice came through on the intercom at 9:47 a.m. "Dr. Carter, your 9:45 is checked in." "I'll be right out," I said. I finished the sentence I was reading. I capped my pen. I straightened my white coat, not nervously, just out of habit, and I walked down the short hallway toward the waiting area. I heard my mother before I saw her. Her voice carried the way it always did in rooms she considered hers, which was most rooms. She was talking to Diane, bright and social, the way she talked to anyone she decided represented an audience. I slowed my pace just slightly and listened. And my son, he was actually pre-med himself. Brilliant young man. He ended up going into business, but the mind was always there, you know? The medical mind runs in the family, I always say. I came around the corner. Diane looked up first and said, with her usual ease, "Dr. Carter, you're 9:45. My mother was mid-sentence. She was turned toward Diane with her good posture and her church smile, and the sentence simply stopped, like a power cut. Her mouth stayed open for a half-second, the next word suspended somewhere behind her teeth. My father sat beside her, hands folded in his lap, and he went very still. I let the silence sit for exactly a beat before I spoke. "Good morning." I kept my voice the same tone I used with every patient. Measured, professional, warm in the clinical sense. "If you're ready, we can head back." My mother closed her mouth. She looked at my coat. She looked at the name on the wall behind Diane's desk, Carter Internal Medicine, as if she were reading it for the first time, which in every way that mattered, she was. Sweetheart, her voice had shifted into something smaller. You work here? I held her gaze. I own it. She blinked. My father looked at the floor. I did not wait for her to respond. I turned and walked back down the hallway toward the consultation room, and after a moment I heard 2 sets of footsteps following me. The walk was perhaps 30 seconds. I have thought about those 30 seconds since. My mother was silent the entire way, Patricia Carter, who had never been silent in her life without choosing to be. I could hear her recalibrating, feel it almost, the way you feel weather changing. She was rearranging the story in real time, deciding what this meant, what to do with it, how to wear it. I opened the consultation room door and gestured them in. They sat down. I closed the door behind us. The room was small and clean, the blinds angled just enough to let in light without glare, the way I preferred. My father sat with his hands still folded. My mother sat with her spine straight and her chin up, and I watched her trying to locate the version of this moment that she could be comfortable in. She wasn't finding it. I sat down across from them, opened their file, and looked up. Good morning, I said. I'm Dr. Carter. I'll be handling your case today. The words landed the way I had known they would. My mother's breath caught. Just slightly, just enough. She looked at me with something I had never seen on her face before. Not quite shame, not quite pride. Something between them that didn't have a clean name. My father looked at me steadily, and in his eyes there was something older than the room, older than this morning. Something that looked, if I was honest, like the beginning of an overdue reckoning. I looked back down at the file. She was mid-sentence bragging about my brother when I walked in. I want you to picture her face, because what happened next is something I had never planned, and it changed everything. Stay with me. You don't want to leave now. I opened their file the way I opened every file, without theater, without hesitation. My mother and father had both completed their intake forms, undergone preliminary blood work at a partner lab the week before their appointment, and submitted their medical histories through the clinic's portal. I had reviewed everything the previous evening. I knew what was in those pages before I sat down. That is how I work. I do not walk into a patient's room to discover. I walk in having already thought. I looked at my mother first. Mrs. Carter, I want to talk through what your labs are showing. I kept my tone even, the same tone I used for every patient, because she was a patient. Whatever else she was, in this room she was a patient, and she would be treated as one. Your lipid panel and your most recent imaging are showing early indicators of coronary artery disease. The blockage is not severe at this stage, but it is progressing, and it requires immediate lifestyle intervention and medication management. She stared at me. I continued. Your blood pressure readings over the past 18 months, I'm looking at the records you submitted from your previous physician, show a pattern of hypertension that has not been adequately controlled by your current prescription. We'll need to adjust that, and I want to schedule you for a stress test within the next 30 days. I gave her a moment to absorb it. I always give patients a moment. This is manageable, I said. Caught at this stage, with the right protocol, you have every reason to expect a good outcome. But you have to take it seriously. She nodded, her hands were in her lap, and they were very still. I turned to my father. His situation was different. A developing autoimmune condition that had been presenting as fatigue and joint inflammation, which his previous doctor had attributed to aging and managed with anti-inflammatories. I told him it was more specific than that we would need to run additional tests to confirm the exact classification, and that once we had the full picture, we could build a proper treatment plan. He listened with the same quiet attention he brought to everything. My father had always been a man who listened, The tragedy of him was that he had listened and then done nothing, but he listened. "Do you have questions about anything I've gone through?" I asked. "Are you good at this?" he said, quietly. Without aggression, without performance. Just the question, direct and plain. The way a man asks something he genuinely needs to know. I met his eyes. "Yes, Dad, I am." Something moved across his face. Brief, contained, but I saw it. He looked down at his hands and then back up at me and gave a single nod, and I felt that nod in a place I had been keeping carefully closed for a very long time. My mother had been quiet for several minutes, too quiet for her. I could feel her gathering herself, feel the discomfort of a room she had no authority in, a conversation where the expertise was mine, and there was no way to redistribute it. I continued through the consultation, outlining next steps, referrals, prescription adjustments. And then she said it. "I just want to make sure we're being thorough." Her voice had found a version of itself. Careful, polite, the tone she used when she was managing a situation. Would it make sense to get a second opinion from, a small pause, another doctor? The room was very quiet. Diane was on the other side of that wall. My name was on the building. My credentials, my research publications, my hospital affiliations, my board certifications, all of it was documented and verifiable and sitting in a folder that I was now sliding across the table toward her. "Take all the time you need," I said. "If you were in my place right now, would you have kept them as patients, or would you have referred them out? I genuinely want to know. Drop your answer in the comments, because the women in this community do not hold back, and I am here for every response. Keep watching." My mother looked at the folder. It sat on the table between us, thick and clean, my name printed on the front in the same font as the sign above my front door. She did not open it. She put her hand on it, just rested her hand on top of it, and sat there. I watched her. There is a particular silence that follows when someone has run out of a story they've been telling for decades, and the next chapter hasn't arrived yet. It isn't peaceful. It's the silence of a rewrite happening in real time, every assumption being pulled up by the root and examined. My mother sat in that silence. My father looked at me with his steady, sorrowful eyes. I closed the main folder, capped my pen, and began going through the prescription paperwork. "I'll have Diane print out the full care plan at checkout," I said. "We'll schedule the follow-ups before you leave today." I kept my voice exactly the same as it had been at the start of the appointment. Professional, clear, precise. Because that is what I am. She still had not opened the folder. The consultation ended at 11:23 a.m. I know because I checked the time when I stood up, the way I always do, tracking the appointment length, making sure the next patient wasn't waiting. That is the thing about running your own practice. The day does not pause for personal history. You close one folder and you open the next. I walked my parents back toward the front desk and handed Diane the care plan to print. My mother was quiet in a way that was new. Not the controlled quiet she used when she was composing herself for an audience, but something rawer than that, something she hadn't chosen. My father walked slowly, the way he always did, but he kept his eyes on me in a way I noticed without acknowledging. Diane went through the checkout process, scheduled the follow-up appointments, explained the prescription instructions. My mother answered in short, polished sentences, performing normalcy with the discipline of someone who had been performing it their entire life. I was turning to go back to my office when my father said, "Naomi." I stopped. He was standing slightly apart from my mother, his hat in both hands, turning it the way he used to turn things when he was working up to something. He looked older than the last time I had seen him in person, not frail, just worn in the way that years of silence will wear a person from the inside. "Could I? Just a minute?" he said. "If you have one." I looked at Diane. She gave me the smallest nod. My next patient was running a few minutes behind. I gestured to my father and walked him down the side hallway, away from the waiting area, to the quiet stretch near the supply room where the foot traffic thinned out. We stood there. He turned his hat in his hands. "I should have said something," he said, "back then, when your mother talked to you the way she did. All those years." He paused. "I should have defended you." I had rehearsed this conversation in my head so many times, across so many years, that I had worn the edges off it. I had imagined the version where I was cold, and the version where I was composed, and the version where something in me broke open just enough to let the old hurt out. Standing there in that hallway, I felt none of those rehearsed things. I felt something simpler and older and harder to name. "Yes," I said, "you should have." I didn't soften it. I didn't add anything to cushion it. I gave him the plain truth, the way I gave patients their diagnoses. Clearly, without cruelty, but without mercy either. The kindest thing you can do for someone is not lie to them about what is real. He nodded. His jaw tightened. He was not a man who cried, and he did not cry then. But something in his face shifted and settled into a new position, like a bone accepting that it had been broken and was now, finally, being set. "I know it's too late to fix it," he said. "I know that, too," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he put his hat back on, slowly, and I turned and walked back to my office. I did not look back. I had 3 more patients that afternoon. I gave each of them my complete attention. I did not think about the hallway conversation until I was driving home that evening on I-285, the Atlanta skyline going amber in the rear view, and then I thought about it the way I thought about most hard things, carefully, from every angle, not rushing toward a conclusion. I felt the weight of it. I also felt, underneath the weight, something that I can only describe as the satisfaction of a door that had finally been properly closed. Not slammed, just shut, quietly, with both hands. Marcus called that night at 9. I almost didn't pick up, but Marcus and I had maintained a different kind of relationship over the years. Warmer, more honest, less loaded than anything with our parents. He was not innocent. He had benefited from the imbalance in that house in ways he had never fully examined. But he had also never been deliberately cruel, and there was a version of him that I believed genuinely loved me, even if he hadn't always known what to do with that. He was half laughing when I answered, the kind of laugh that lives right next to disbelief. "Naomi," a pause. "Mom called me." "I figured she would," she said. He stopped. Started again. "She said her doctor is very thorough. She said her doctor takes time with patients and really listens." Another pause. "She told 3 people at Bible study that her daughter is handling her case." I sat with that for a moment. "She didn't say my name?" "She said, my daughter, the doctor." I looked at the ceiling. There it was. Not an apology, not a reckoning. Just my mother, with her extraordinary gift for rewriting history without acknowledging the original draft, quietly absorbing my existence into a narrative that had always been hers, taking what she could use and leaving the rest untouched. She had spent 20 years introducing Marcus as the one who almost became a doctor. She would now introduce me as the doctor, and she would do it with the same smooth ownership, as if she had always believed it. As if she had never sat at a kitchen table in Decatur and told me I couldn't keep up. Marcus asked, carefully, "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Yes," I said. "I actually am." "She's not going to apologize," he said. "You know that." "I know." "Does that?" He didn't finish. It did for a long time, I said. It doesn't anymore. He was quiet. Then, I'm proud of you, right? I should have said that a long time ago. I felt something soften just slightly, the way it does when the right thing arrives, even if it arrives late. I know, Marcus. We talked for a little while longer, about nothing much, about his kids, about the dealership, about Atlanta traffic, the ordinary things. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and thought about the fact that my parents' names were already back in my patient schedule. 3 weeks out. A follow-up. I noticed, carefully, what I felt when I looked at those names. Not dread, not anticipation, not the old, complicated tightening in my chest that had accompanied the thought of my mother for most of my adult life. Just steady. Just the same, even readiness I brought to every case. I closed the laptop and went to make tea. I treated my parents like I treated every patient. That is not a small thing. I want you to understand that, because I think people expect this part of the story to look like victory, to have a particular shine to it, to feel the way revenge is supposed to feel in the movies, which is clean and complete and somehow final. It did not feel like that. What it felt like was work, careful, precise, important work. And it turned out that doing that work without any contamination of bitterness or score settling, that was the sharpest thing I had. Not the white coat, not the building with my name on it. The fact that I was genuinely, professionally, thoroughly good at what I did, and that there was nothing in my conduct they could point to, nothing to diminish, nothing to explain away. Patricia Carter had built her life on narrative. She was a woman who controlled rooms with language, who could reshape any situation with the right framing, who had managed my entire childhood with the gentle, devastating power of what she chose to say and leave unsaid. In my consultation room, she had no story to tell that changed anything. The labs were the labs. The diagnosis was the diagnosis. My credentials were my credentials. I had given her something she could not reframe, and her only move, the second opinion. I had answered so quietly and so thoroughly that she hadn't even been able to sustain it. That is what thoroughness looks like as a weapon. It doesn't raise its voice. It just stays right there. My father came to his follow-up appointments faithfully. He was a good patient, compliant, honest about his symptoms, willing to make the dietary changes the treatment required. In the small, functional exchanges of those appointments, something shifted between us, not repaired. I am careful about that word, because you cannot repair what was never fully built, but something honest. When I spoke, he listened, and when he responded, he did not perform. He just talked to me. Raymond Carter passed away 14 months after that first appointment. It was not sudden. His condition progressed despite our best management, the way some conditions do regardless of thoroughness, because the body has its own timeline. I was present near the end. I had made sure of that, not as his doctor in that final stretch, but as his daughter, which is a different kind of presence. He held my hand at one point and said, "You were always the one I was proudest of. I just didn't know how to say it where it counted." I believed him. I also knew it was true and too late, and that both of those things could exist at the same time without canceling each other. That is something medicine teaches you. Not every diagnosis has a cure, and knowing the name of something does not always change its outcome. Some things you hold without fixing. I held that. My mother continues to come to Carter Internal Medicine for her care. She is a compliant patient. She takes her medications, attends her stress tests, follows the dietary plan. She has not looked me in the eye and said, "I was wrong about you. I am sorry." She has not said those words, and I have stopped waiting for them, not with bitterness, but with the same acceptance I bring to an incurable condition. You manage around it. You do not wait for a resolution that will not come. What she does is introduce me to people at church as my daughter, the doctor. She says it with a particular pride, the kind that carries no memory of its own history. I have heard her say it through Marcus, through cousins, through the ambient reporting of a family that talks about everything except what matters. I used to want that sentence to feel like justice. Now it just feels like information. What justice actually felt like was quieter than I expected and more durable. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I sat across from a new patient. A young woman, early 20s, referred to me for fatigue and recurring infections that hadn't been resolved elsewhere. She was nervous the way young patients are nervous when they've been told too many times that nothing is wrong with them. I read her file the way I read every file, slowly, completely, testing each piece against the others before I spoke. I found what everyone else had missed. It was a detail, a single abnormal marker buried in a routine panel, the kind that gets passed over when you're moving quickly, when you're keeping up with the pace of things. I sat with it. I cross-referenced it. I ordered the follow-up test that confirmed it, and I called her with the results in language she could understand, and I watched her body release the held breath of someone who had been telling the truth and finally been heard. She said, "Nobody listened the way you did. I thought about being 16 in Decatur. I thought about the kitchen table and the folded hands and the word realistic. I thought about Mr. Osai and the second row and the biology test in the shoebox. I thought about Dr. Shaw in the hallway and the weight of the white coat at the ceremony and the sign above the door and my father in the hallway turning his hat in his hands. I thought about all the years of slow, careful, unrushed building that had led to this room and this patient and this moment. I am a slow reader. I process information deeply rather than quickly. I sit with hard things before I speak about them. I read charts twice, sometimes 3 times. I stay in the difficult question longer than most people are comfortable with. In medicine, they call that thoroughness. My mother called it a ceiling. She was wrong. And I never needed her to say sorry, I just needed her to sit in my chair. If this story hit something in you, if you have ever been told by someone who was supposed to be in your corner that you were not enough, not fast enough, not the right kind of smart, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments below. This community is built for exactly those stories. And if you are not yet subscribed to Revenge Bite, do it now, because there are more stories coming, and every single one of them is for you.